well, scores of people are taking to the streets for another night of protest. A sense that this country's justice system is unfair to minorities is fueling the angry demonstrations. Demonstrators throughout the nation can be heard chanting, "No justice, no peace." And we've seen those pictures all week long. Torkwase Sekou is a former Essex County, New Jersey judge and a former public defender, and she's here to give her perspective on the events that we've seen happen over the last couple of weeks. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's nice to meet you. You know, there are so many people that say that race is the common thread that runs through so many of these situations, whether it's Michael Brown or Darren Hunt or Eric Garner. Do you see it that way?
Well, I think the racism is consistent. It's almost ingrained to a certain extent when it comes to cases that have officers who are shooting young African Americans. We don't have as many in the opposite, be it African American officers, Hispanic officers, or Asians officers. And there's, of course, we know there are more than just white officers. When it comes to shooting African American males, it just seems like the disparity has made it look more like it is a black and white thing. Is it your opinion that, because so many people have used this as an occasion to talk about the value of body cams, is it your opinion that extra accountability like this would help in these kinds of situations? I think it would assist in giving us a more accurate view rather than a lot of different opinions. As we know from the telephone game when we were younger, it gets to one person, after a while it starts changing and forming into something else. A body cam, I think, on officers would give a more accurate view of what they saw and what actually happened. Torkwase, tell me what you understand about the record of the relationship between the New York City police officers that work in Staten Island and the community of Staten Island. There seems to be a disproportionate number of complaints against those officers and lawsuits against those officers. Well, Staten Island is one of the few boroughs in New York that has a larger number of non-black officers on their police forces. You don't hear these complaints as often in Brooklyn or the Bronx, and not even in some sections of Queens. But I wouldn't just give Staten Island a bad rap in this particular instance. I would say in this particular case, if you look at the video, all of the officers on the scene at that time happened to be non-black. Mm-hmm. Well, with the exception of the one officer, Daniel Pantaleo, yes, who used the alleged chokehold. Let me talk about your experience. You're a former Superior Court judge serving in New Jersey. From your perspective on the bench, which do you consider to be more valuable, or do they have their own place? And that is the grand jury process, or simply bringing charges at the discretion of the DA or prosecutor and an open trial? I think the grand jury process is a better process because the community gets a input in what's happening in and around where they live. I think in cases where there are officers involved, you know that police officers and the prosecutor's office must work together. And if there is a case like in these cases, and maybe it would be better if an independent person is brought in so that there doesn't look like there's any impropriety. Heard so many analysts and legal experts say that very same thing. In these cases, now when we're talking about this thread of racism that perhaps run through these, does an African American have a better chance with a trial in open court as opposed to the grand jury? I think it's probably no different than it is within who is chosen as a juror. The problem, as in most cases, not enough African Americans are registered as to be jurors, be it by
registered to vote, which puts them in the pool,
the voting pool, mm-hmm. Or by your driver's license. So both of those things, I think, has a lot to do with it. And a lot of folks that are in certain communities don't serve or try not to serve. Get out of those examples where being involved makes a big difference. Always. Torkwase Sekou, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.